Well, welcome everyone. My name is Alejandro Rodriguez, and I'm delighted to have all of you here for this conversation on equity matters with Dan Clark. Before we actually get to the uh, the conversation that we have with Dan, I want to just go over a very few things about the Spirituality Network that is hosting this event. I looking at the list of attendees, I know you're all pretty familiar with the network, but I'll do this for the benefit of anyone that might listen in later. So the Spirituality Network, our mission is really to help cultivate the awakened life through contemplative living and action, and we offer a number of different things that help people to have that awakening. And this conversation that we're having is just one of those things that we do. Our vision is awakened lives transforming the world. And there is so much change that needs to happen in the world. And I just hope that we're playing even just a little part in the process of that awakening for people. We work with people with and without any formal faith affiliations, and those with and without the ability to pay. So we're here for anyone that wants to engage with us, and we will find a way to uh, help bring our programs to you, even if you can't afford to pay. The types of things that we do are very rich. I've listed here on the slide many of those things that we do. I'll call out the fourth bullet down just in particular. This conversation that we're having is part of our JEDI series, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We've already had a conversation with Tim Ahrens on justice. This is our conversation on equity with Dan Clark. And in the early part of next year, we'll have a conversation on diversity and one on inclusion. We believe that this is really important that we have this focus because all of these things impact us on our faith journey. And we believe it's critical that we open our eyes to the situations that are impacting others in the world. So with that, I want to just invite us to have a moment of silence to kind of get us in the right frame of mind for this conversation. So if you wish, to close your eyes, you can. And also, if you wish to ponder this quote that I shared with you when I emailed the group earlier today, uh, I had the pleasure of being with Mary Beth yesterday in a small meeting, and she brought up this quote, and I thought it was so important that I shared it with you here today. So let's just take a moment of silence, reflect on this quote, and then we'll begin with our conversation with Dan. Thank you for holding that space. So I've known Dan probably a little bit more than 10 years now. I first met him at First Congregational United Church of Christ, where Dan was one of the worship leaders. And I just took an instant liking to Dan and his spirit and the way he represents himself. And I'm especially excited about the work that he's doing right now with Faith in Public Life. Dan, you've recently gotten some expanded capabilities. Why don't you tell the group a little bit about what you're doing there and perhaps how your role is changing now that you've got some new responsibilities?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Um, I'm Dan, as Alejandro said. My pronouns are he, him, and excited to spend some time with you all this evening. Uh, I started working with Faith in Public Life in October 2016, and if you just stop and think for a moment, that was just a couple weeks before there was a major shift in our shared experience of how this country is run. And for about 7 years, I've been leading the work of Faith in Public Life in the state of Ohio, and recently have moved to a national role as director of regional organizing. So there's team members of mine in Maryland and Florida and Georgia, and soon adding someone else in Ohio that I'll be supporting them and resourcing them. And so after meeting Alejandro when I was working for churches as a minister, I was the interim associate minister at First Church for a year. I've continued in this journey of faith-based organizing. So that's on the professional side. That's who I am and where I sit today.
Well, what do you want to share about yourself on the personal side, Dan?
Well, I'm a parent of 3 teenagers. So in addition to the administrative change in DC that happened a couple weeks after I started this work, my teenagers are the other reason that there's more and more gray in my beard all the time. They're lovely humans, but it's a challenge to be a teenager today. You know, they were all in middle school when COVID hit. Like, lots going on with mental health with young people these days, and so I stay busy parenting three teenagers. Been married 5 years to a farmer's daughter, so instead of living a short drive from First Church on Columbus's east side, now I live in Licking County on 8 acres. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's beautiful out here. So I don't know how to fix tractors and stuff like that, but I love living out here, and we have a spring-fed farm pond and a couple horses, and I didn't see them this weekend, but my youngest daughter said both Saturday night and Sunday night she saw shooting stars off our back deck. So
Oh, cool.
I love living out here where there's less light pollution.
Wonderful. So your children aren't just lovely, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
They're just beautiful human beings. And if you don't know this about Dan, he's a huge Beatles fan, and his kids are all named in honor of Beatles songs, which I just love.
Yeah. So the ABC did the Beatles anthology series, in the early 90s. I was the right age, like a young teenager getting into music when that came out. My brother and I got obsessed with it. My parents recorded it on VHS and we wore those tapes out. And so, 20 years later, whenever, my kids are Jude, Lucy, and Sadie, and my dog is Molly. So yeah, there's lots of Beatles love in this house.
Awesome. Well, Dan, let's get to the topic that we're here to talk about, equity. And why don't we start with what is it about equity and the work that you do that makes you so passionate about engaging in it?
Yeah. So I grew up in evangelical churches, and after undergrad, I got my degree in music from Valparaiso and went to work for evangelical churches. And they were, um, I feel like they were skilled in offering mercy care to folks who had felt an immediate needs, but offering solidarity and advocacy beyond meeting immediate needs is where that fell off. And so that's really where I started to be awakened to differences in equity. Then I can trace back into childhood, like, oh, that moment and that moment and that moment. But it was in my early 20s that I really started to see that, like, not everybody's starting from the same place. Not everybody's starting with the same stuff in their backpack. If we're all fellow travelers on this journey, we're starting from very different places. And I ended up getting to work in some international settings as a development and outreach director for a couple international charities, nonprofits, ministries, whatever you would call it, but spent a lot of time in orphanages in Eastern Europe and in villages in East Africa. And just, that's when I really started to see, like, folks with some of the challenges there didn't come from nowhere. You know, there are structural and systemic reasons why some of these challenges exist. And that's when I really started to feel like I wanted to zoom out and understand better some of the inequities that created the reasons that direct services needed to be available. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when I look at you, you have the traits of, from a demographic perspective, that speaks of privilege. I mean, you're a white male, heterosexual, Christian. All of those things are, things that put you in the majority. Was this an eye-opening for you, or was this something that you always were aware of and just became more acute? It became more acute as you went out into the world.
Yeah, I think as I became aware of it, there were some early experiences that started to make me realize that some of this stuff was off. So an example is I had a family member, an extended family member, who's a gay woman who was very involved in her church. Also had extended friends and things who were Catholic, for example. And the people in my church loved me and loved Jesus and tried to teach me all the Sunday school stories, but they didn't see those folks fitting in the story or in the family. And at a very young age, I started to think, like, that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't resonate with me. And since you brought up the Beatles, I'll bring the Beatles back in. Like, listening to anti-war music as a teenager in the 90s, anti-war music from the 60s as a teenager in the 90s, and starting to figure out, okay, what are they trying to say? Like, what powers are they trying to resist?
Mm-hmm.
John Lennon, for example, wasn't being drafted into the US military. He wasn't living in South Asia, but he was passionate about seeing that war come to an end. And so I loved that music, and it made me think, like, why do we need to be a part of this? So
Well,
music was an early thing,
yeah,
exposure to relationships, and like seeing some of the incontinuity was a major thing. And yeah, becoming aware that, like, I was born with a lot of privilege as a cisgender white man with, opportunities for education and things like that. And just thinking that we're all connected, and we all need to share the resources that are at our disposal.
yeah, yeah. Well, I love what you said about John Lennon. He wasn't being drafted into the U.S. military, but still had a voice that had something to say about those who were. Um, so that makes me think about the importance of having all different perspectives talking about equity, not just the ones who are perhaps suffering from inequity. Uh, so, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love thinking about those different perspectives that come together. And this is something a month ago you and I talked about, Alejandro, in the podcast, was um, music and nature were the two examples I used then. Like, without diversity, the beauty of music and nature um, disappears, right?
Yes.
Like, walking through a monoculture is very different than walking through like a forest that's full of life, or a meadow or a riverside that's full of all this diverse life that's working together. Same thing with music, when they're when a choir is singing a melody line, what happens then when they break into 3 or 4 parts? Then your your body, you physiologically respond to that diversity, and it awakens you inside. And so I think music and nature have been teachers for me on how beauty comes from diversity.
Yeah.
And if there's one if there's only one person or one type of people that have the mic all the time, we're going to lose the beauty in the human family, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have assembled a diverse group of people that are working with you in faith and public life, not just staff members, but people that you engage with. Why is the work of equity so important in faith for public life? And what are you doing that helps build a more equitable world?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if there should be one of those disclaimers that sometimes people put on their Twitter or X accounts, like, all opinions are those of mine, So since you're asking about faith in public life, I actually pulled up a document to help me share our vision. So I'm going to just read a sentence to you. Our vision is that we envision a country in which an experience of spiritual connection binds all people with one another, and in which a sense of belonging and community gives every individual the confidence that their human rights are held sacred, making it possible for all to thrive. So we do a lot of policy work, a lot of narrative shaping work, and that's where human rights can be held sacred. That's where people can have the possibility to thrive. But that flows from this source of believing that everybody's connected. Every community is where the power is, and connection is where the power is. That's really how we approach things like that, and that makes us have to look square square in the face of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, like the JEDI series, and figuring out, okay, if we're all connected, if we're all bound together as a human family, where are the inequities and injustices that prevent folks from having their rights honored, prevents folks from being able to thrive and have opportunity? And so that's where we really look at inequities, inequities in healthcare, inequities in access to the ballot, inequities in education, inequities in safety. Yeah.
Yeah. So I, sometimes when you have a very diverse set of voices, it becomes difficult to speak with one voice. But you seem to do a pretty good job of uh, listening and collecting different perspectives and then amplifying a single voice. Are there particular challenges that you're experiencing in representing the perspectives of lots of different faith traditions?
Yeah, absolutely. Because these faith traditions aren't singing in unison, and they shouldn't. They should sing in harmony, or they will sing in harmony when when given the opportunity. And so I've heard it talked about a difference between interfaith work and multi-faith work. Others might have different feelings or perspectives on this, and I'm open to hearing that. But interfaith work is kind of lowest common denominator approach,
Mm.
where it's like, okay, we can get to love our neighbor in these three traditions that share some sacred texts and share some prophets and things like that. So that's interfaith work, really getting to the lowest common denominator. And that's maybe sometimes where to start, start with what's in common, start with what's shared. But multi-faith work is really looking to lift up the the distinctive features of different faith traditions. I think of the prophetic tradition in the Black Baptist Church. I think of the peacemaking tradition in the Mennonite Church. For example, just I wanted to think of this two quick examples, and when those come together, and the tradition of prayer among our Muslim siblings, for example, the tradition of rest among our Jewish siblings. There's all these different voices that can come together and create a tapestry. And yeah, it can be difficult because some of these issues affect our communities differently.
Yes.
Which gets after some of the inequities. And there's definitely faith leaders who want to be involved in a big picture thing we're working on to reform democracy, to make it more accessible to more voters and things like that. But then some things happening in their own community causes them to need to put their energy there,
Yeah.
challenges.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying about the diversity of nature and music, it is, I think, the diversity of those different faith traditions where we can really learn and grow. It's all nice and convenient when we have things that we align on and think are similar. But I think the real gift is when we can appreciate the diversity of other people's traditions and learn from that and maybe consider something that we hadn't thought about in the past. To open ourselves up to new insights and new learnings and a new awareness of the conditions that other people live under. Because if we stay focused on the things that we're aligned on and similar, we never learn those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think it takes some intention because because of the access to information that we have right now, you can just find feedback loops and just have, in the various forms of media, just have somebody telling you what you already believe over and over and over again through music and movies and books and 24-hour news and all that stuff, right? And it just reinforces that.
Yes.
But to intentionally seek out different sources for information, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah.
When the quarantine hit in 2020, I read a lot and I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I'm driving a lot. And I made a vow to myself to not read or listen to any books written by white men in the year 2020. And it was a really helpful exercise. And it also just brought to my awareness how easy it is to just fall into the rut, into the trap of just, let me listen to people whose experiences are like mine, right?
Yeah.
And so it takes some intention to like break out of that a little bit and seek out other voices.
Yeah. And they're out there if we work at it.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can have a conversation about equity without talking about power. So I haven't done a whole lot of like deep research into power, but I'm fascinated with the notion of power and the different kinds of power. Because I think, especially for marginalized groups, I think there is a tendency to think I don't have power. But there are so many different kinds of power that are available to us that I think if we open and to it and learn about different kinds of power, we might find that we have more influence than we think we do.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about power, there's like three resources that always come to mind for me, and one is a book by Walter Wink called "The Powers That Be." If folks are familiar with that work, or I was introduced to that quite a while ago, and I don't want to go into all that, but he does a tremendous job of like analyzing Jesus's use of power in the New Testament, for those from that tradition. Uh, I also think of the three faces of power, and I have a couple links. Alejandro, can I just drop them in the chat and people
Yeah,
can get
yeah.
them later? Um, the three faces of power are interesting to me, especially now that we're, a week out from last Tuesday's election, which since SJR2 passed in May and put issue one on the ballot in August, it's been a really busy 6 months for me. We've been very involved, convening and co-convening the faith subcommittees for I'll say the winning side of both the August and November elections. There's been a lot of not winning for progressives in Ohio, so I'm trying to really enjoy that win. But when
Mhm.
I think about the three faces of power, the first face of power is when you organize people and resources to directly be involved in making a decision. That's what happens when people go to the ballot on an issue. That's not what happens when people go to the ballot to vote on candidates in gerrymandered districts,
Mhm.
uh, because voices are silenced and subverted and undermined. Uh, but when there's direct democracy, people and resources can pull together and become powerful together. I also think, you could ask Pastor Alicia Thompson at the United Church of Granville, where I'm a member, how often I'm there on Sundays. It's not that often. I think for like the first 20 years of my adult life, I was working and on staff at a church, and got a little tired. So now I don't go as often, but I still love the way faith communities exercise this first face of power, because every 7 days people and resources come together around a shared vision for the kind of world we want to live in together.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a way that power is exercised. The second face of power is about infrastructure and networks and resources, and that one's where the questions about equity really come to play, because the systems and structures that are set up for the powerful to have more power, for the resource to have more resources, um, that power can grow and become damaging to a lot of folks if it's not kept in check by the people coming together. And the third face of power, I think, is especially interesting to faith leaders and spiritual directors and folks like that. And that's meaning making. How do we interpret and and absorb and make meaning of what we're seeing happening around us, what we're a part of? And this is where myths and parables and ancient texts and in poems and music become such, and ritual, all these things become such valuable tools, because they help us make meaning of what we're experiencing together, and as we make that meaning, we build power
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can underestimate the power of those myths and stories.
Mm-hmm.
They move people, because there's an incredible truths in them that people can latch onto and move them to action.
Yeah, I love Joseph Campbell's work with Power of Myth, if folks are familiar with that. I remember, um right now I use this app called Libby to listen to books on my phone. It's free audiobooks from your library. This is
Yeah.
your Libby commercial. But I remember the first time I listened to The Power of Myth, it was audio from a library, and so I had this big, fold out binder on the passenger seat of the car, working through it all, and it's a really helpful way to look at these stories that help us
Yeah.
understand our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a beautiful, I listened to it from the library on Libby as well.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, my wife introduced me to that. So you brought up gerrymandering, and I think we have to call out that it's not just one party that gerrymanders the districts in their state. Both
Mhm.
Republicans and Democrats are guilty of doing that. Uh, we, so I, as a progressive, feel it deeply here in Ohio because of the impact that it has here, but other people are feeling that as well. But
Yeah.
it's not right.
Yeah, for sure. And as a I don't identify with either political party. The fact that there's only two is such a binary way of thinking about the diversity of human thought. Also,
Mhm.
so to even say either is the first red flag, right?
It's fair.
um, and I think we see something happening statewide where one of those two parties has an advantage and is trying to consolidate and maintain and expand power. As a former resident of the city of Columbus, I can say the other party does something similar in the city of Columbus.
Hmm.
Uh, I have a lot of, if I don't know if there's Columbus folks on the call or where people are from, but Miss Adrienne Hood, who ran for city council, is an inspiring community leader, who whose family has been really impacted by the inequities in the way um, the city of Columbus works. And I have a lot of love and respect for her. And she ran an um, amazing campaign in an uphill battle because money can buy votes, you know. Um,
Hmm.
and so I just think about the lockdown on power that there is in Columbus from the other party. It's a
Yeah,
problem on both ends.
yeah, it really is. So Faith in Public Life was very active in this last election, very active in promoting issue one. Why was that so important for Faith in Public Life to do?
Yeah, it's because we believe that people have inherent dignity and worth, um, granted to that, whatever a person's idea of God or the organizing principle of love, whatever the source is for that, everyone has that and should be able to make their own healthcare decisions without overreach by those who aren't experts. I mean, if I let's say there's a I have a pond where I live, but I don't have a river. But let's say I need to build a bridge over that river. I'm going to hire a civil engineer because I don't want that bridge to collapse when I'm crossing it. um, I don't think legislators are medical experts. They're not educational experts. And so medical decisions need to be left to individuals and their medical providers. Educational decisions need to be left to educational professionals. So it was really important for us to get involved because we wanted to create a community where people can thrive, you know, um, and have the opportunity to chart their own course, to have agency over um, their own bodies, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And you and I chatted just a little bit before the call about the response to the losing side, that they're going to keep pressing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you didn't see this video clip, but I saw uh, a clip of Rick Santorum on Fox News, uh, basically talking about the Ohio election and the sexy and flashy issues that were on the ballot with reproductive rights and marijuana legalization that were the secret sauce to bring out young voters. And he said he was thankful that other states don't allow anything to come onto the ballot because pure democracy is not good, which just blew me away. It just like, I can't believe he was saying this out loud.
It's like mansplaining as a political platform.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
um, yeah, and I heard that Governor DeWine wants to manage some of the implementation and do it the Ohio way, is what he said. I wonder what he means by the Ohio way.
Mhm.
Is it the householder way? Because he's serving a couple decades in prison for stealing from me and any other Ohio taxpayer in this room. And so I wonder if the Ohio way DeWine's referring to has to do with silencing and subverting and stealing from Ohioans.
Yeah,
Because the people have spoken, and any registered voter over age 18, let's hear them. Let's hear their voice.
yeah, yeah. Well, this just makes me think about how the issue of inequity is going to continue to be something that we have to pay attention to and fight, because it feels like there are voices or people in power who are restricting rights and making it more difficult for people to live in an equitable world. So
Mm.
it feels like this is going to be a challenge that we are going to have to keep fighting toward.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we need to stay connected, the phrase that came to my head is keep our hand at the plow, you know, um, keep working together. I think maybe the plow is a great image for that because of the non-violent nature. The prophet Isaiah talks about turning, weapons of violence into tools for cultivation and growing things that nourish the community. So like continuing to work together to hold those in power accountable. And there's a variety of ways to do that. The late Ruben Castilla Herrera, an organizer in Columbus, was a dear friend and mentor of mine, and he talked about when we organize, sometimes it's inside the system, sometimes it's outside the system, and sometimes it's against the system.
Mhm.
I think each of those three have a different power and a different equity analysis, and different folks need to take the lead on those three different streams. And I think it's going to take all three of those, accountability, prophetic accountability, spiritual accountability, inside the system, outside the system, and against the system, to get the system to work for all people.
Yeah, 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 totally. So, I mean, you just brought up Isaiah. Um, I I think this goes without saying, but fighting for equity is an act of faith for you. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I see, um in the stories we see of Jesus, he's not he does show in the let me get my thoughts together. In Catholic social teaching, they talk about God having a preferential option for the poor. Um, this to me is a call to equity. It's not that everybody gets the same thing, because when somebody starts with 10 widgets and then somebody else starts with one widget and then you give everybody 10 widgets, you're going to have somebody with 20 and somebody else with 11. Sorry for math late on a Monday evening. So and that's equality, right? That's the sameness of equality, whereas equity really takes into account the nuance and diversity of human experience, and like the different challenges that come to different people in different communities. Um, and we see Jesus doing that, where like the most marginalized folks in a story get pulled to the center of the story, and they end up getting what they need, you know. And so it is a thing of faith for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Dan, I think I want to turn and open this up for the rest of the group who might have questions as they've been listening to us. And then we'll certainly give you a chance to share any closing thoughts that you might have. But let me, one of the things that we like to do is to make sure that we're creating an environment for safety in what we ask. So like to just bring out a few points that we want to emphasize. First of all, we want to encourage each of us to listen with empathy and curiosity, that we respect all viewpoints and see others' experiences as valid. We want to be sensitive to not monopolize the conversation. So try and be brief in asking your questions or making your points. We invite but not require anyone to share. We want to be aware of our own trauma, emotions, and manage our own responses as we hear things. We want to see innocence in other people's comments and allow us to be wherever we are on our respective journeys, and make sure that we embrace each other's faith tradition, even if it's not our own. So with that said, I'll invite anyone that wants to ask a question or make a comment to just go ahead and go off mute and ask away. Yes, Amanda.
First of all, I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes. I was having difficulty locating the link. Dan, you said how important it was for you to find models of diversity in music and nature. And it just hit me, at a time in our history when the arts, literature, music, all of that is being, there's an attempt to limit access. And at a time when our natural world is showing us the ravages of climate change. I feel like, I guess I don't have a question. I just want to just say that this is such an important aspect of human life for any reason, but especially when we get into wanting to widen our horizons and to expand. We need that. And so I just want to applaud your love of the Beatles. I've been following them from the beginning, so I've got a few more years on it. But I just wonder if you have anything you'd like to say about the trend towards limiting access to books, art, literature.
Yeah, I think I'm jotting down a couple ideas. The two main, first of all, thank you for making that connection, because our creative and natural lives together are under threat, right? And I think it relates to Mary Beth's comment in the chat as well. DEI programs and organizations. And so the two thoughts that come immediately to mind for me are that this has to do with the difference between fear and love,
right?
And it has to do with commodification of people and the planet. And so those are the two big things that come to mind for me. Having growing up evangelical, I've spent a lot of time in the pages of the Bible, and it's always fun to ask folks what they think the opposite of love is, and the easy answer is hate, but I think the opposite of love is fear,
I
and
agree.
perfect love casts out all fear. And I think people are afraid of differences.
Oh,
I mean, we have a whole word for it, xenophobia, right? And Mark Twain famously said once, beware of travel, for it is hostile to bigotry. um, you get to know people who are different, people who have different experiences, people who have different perspectives, and prejudice and bigotry starts to melt away. But if you just are subscribing to feedback loops, xenophobia is what ends up growing. I think that's a part of what we're seeing. And I don't know, I encourage my kids to read banned books. I love those banned book studies and banned book lists. It's like, oh, you just gave me my Christmas shopping list. Thanks for assembling this. Thanks for assembling this list. I think the other thing that's at play in what you're saying is that um, the roots of capitalism and colonialism that are still very, very evident in our modern life, where people's time and people's bodies and people's skills are commodified rather than honored and cherished, is a big part of that attack on our lives together. Trying to think if there was, I felt like there was a follow-up thought to that, but it's escaped me now. Yeah, Mary Beth, I see your comment about dismantling DEI programs. I saw somebody post on Facebook, which I don't recommend being active on Facebook. I'm always taking it off my phone, and then a few days later get curious. It's yeah, it's like much of these commodifying efforts, it's maybe running its course and turning out like more bad than good at the moment. But I saw somebody post that they were concerned about issue 2 because of the social equity program piece of it, and that they said that they were for equality but not equity, and it was in all caps in their post. And I had a decision to make. I thought about inviting that person to this conversation, but I decided, like, I would be barking up the wrong tree. We all have to make those kind of choices in a social media space. And I think folks are afraid of equity because they have a scarcity mindset. I learned a lot about scarcity mindset from Brene Brown, and just thinking about how it creates a sense of competition among people who could be collaborating and could be living in community. So I definitely recommend Brene Brown's thoughts on this. And I have another book to recommend that I thought of earlier. Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey, Hersey. I see a thumbs up. She's also very active on Instagram as The Nap Ministry. And it's not just about like catching 20 minutes or 2 hours of sleep in the day. It's really about like detangling ourselves from the expectations of productivity and commodification and just constant go, and really trying to recapture like what makes people divine and sacred and beautiful, whether or not they're producing.
Thank you, Dan. Virginia, go ahead.
Dan, I really appreciate your being here this evening. I really appreciate hearing all that you had to share. And it sounds like you're living a very rich life, and I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
One of a couple of things that really resonated with me was when you touched on having power. and people, and us as human beings, coming in, realizing our power. And I have personally, somewhere along the line, come to realize how detrimental the societal ills have inflicted powerlessness, or helplessness. And and this is learned, and this is something, if you're faced or challenged with in every entity of your life or within society, and you're lacking a support system, or your support system is as weak because they're going through, the same things, that in itself is a terrible feat, to constantly face, but then trying not to remain victim of that,
Mhm.
you know. So could you possibly speak to that anymore, that issue anymore?
Yeah. I appreciate you lifting that up, that a lot of us do end up feeling powerless and helpless. It makes us think that we need to accept the things we cannot change to bring us back to our opening reflection. And I think for me, realizing that powerlessness and helplessness is not the natural state of a person comes from being in community. We can stand on the shoulders of giants. We can learn from wisdom teachers, and whether that's in physical community with other people, or being in community with bell hooks by reading your books, these kind of things. It's like those become the teachers, right? That help us learn and realize that we aren't powerless, we aren't helpless, and when we come together and live as the social beings we're intended to be, that we can unlearn those kind of victimhood perspectives that many of us fall into. I think a lot of folks get there just out of sheer exhaustion, and fatigue, and just how we have to run to stand still, run to try to keep up with all the expectations and all the demands. And it makes us end up just throwing up our hands and losing like that spark, losing that power. So I encourage folks feeling powerless, feeling helpless, to seek out community, seek out spiritual direction, seek out mental health care, seek out community book clubs in person or online, or any of these kind of things, to learn that together, just like a choir, let's start singing together and see how powerful our voices can be. Yeah, thanks for that comment, Virginia.
Belginia, when you were talking about helplessness being a learned behavior or feeling, it made me think. I've watched a video of I think a representative from Texas talking about a very intentional effort to dismantle public school systems in the United States. And he said, but the first part of that strategy was to discredit public school systems. And if you discredit, then it's easy to dismantle. And so I think we are all subject to all kinds of manipulative campaigns that are intended to create that sense of helplessness that will maybe make people think, I can't do anything about this. And I think that's why that quote from Angela Davis is so important, that we do not fall into the trap of accepting the things that we cannot change, because that's a real danger. And the other side wins when we accept that as truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Liz.
Just to follow up with that, couple things that I always found interesting is that the Republicans have done an excellent job of being able to get that almost cohesiveness when they choose something that they want to focus on. And they are like a pit bull. They never, ever, ever give up. And I put out there Roe v. Wade as an excellent example because they worked on that and never gave up for 30 some years trying to get that taken off the books. And they've chipped away at it and chipped away at it until they finally got what they wanted by any means that they could get. And the commentary that I have listened to is that unfortunately the Democrats don't seem to have the same cohesiveness and same persistence in trying to pull things together. And I think that's kind of what has disheartened me somewhat, because I would like to be able to contribute. I'd like to be able to do something. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And I don't want to jump into a river. I kind of just at this point want to stick my toe in the water until I get used to and get more familiar with and get comfortable with as I'm going along, if that makes any sense. So if you could speak to that, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and complex observation. And I think the things that come to mind, and Alejandro, you can just edit or censor as you need to, and I'll just say what's on my mind, is you know, money is a powerful motivator to get people to fall in line and say they agree to things. And then that more money then causes more agreement. And I think for as long as the fossil fuel industry is resourcing the conservative agenda, like the winning money is going to be on that end, you know. Politics would be very different if we could get money out of it, right? I think we would see less of what you're describing. I also think groups that have more that are more homogeneous, and tend to think alike because they gather with people who have shared experiences, might get to a shared platform in a simpler way than folks who are intentionally trying to bring different views together. I think that's just a very natural and, in my mind, appropriate and healthy thing. But when you're running on 2-year and 4-year election cycles, you sometimes run out of time to get folks weaved together. I think a phrase that comes to my mind, I first encountered, I don't know if it's from this author, but I first encountered it with Eugene Peterson's book on the Psalms of the Ascent called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. I think of that phrase. We need a long obedience in the same direction. And overturning Roe v. Wade was a 50-year project. And that's a half century of a long obedience in the same direction. And so to think about the inverse, trying to move toward justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, what do we need to do, not for the next 5 months, but for the next 5 decades to see those kinds of changes. And I hear you on like not wanting to jump in the river, but figuring out where to dip your toe in. And if some of your interest and passion lies around electoral politics, I heard at a where was I? I was in Savannah, Georgia, at a conference of the progressive organizations working together for change in Georgia, and one of the conveners said that the most important election is the next one. So really just thinking like, what's the next thing coming? What's where I am? What's happening in the next 6 months where I live that I can help to be a part of a change? And maybe that's the school board, paying more attention to school boards or township trustees and those kind of places that become entry points for folks who then build from there. Yeah, those are some of my incomplete thoughts in response.
So Liz, I think that I probably have thought very much the same way as you have for a long time. But I think I'm noticing some changes that are happening now. Like overturning of Roe v. Wade was such a wake-up call for me, that and things that have been enshrined in our way of life for 2 generations are not seen as precedent was an eye-opening thing. And I have often thought that the Republican Party have been much better at sticking to a consistent message. I think that's splintering now. And I think that just the general reaction from people about or losing faith in institutions of all kind is making it going to have an impact on elections and how we go to church and, how we learn and the universities that we go to. I think we are in a period of time where everything is up for grabs and is going to have to be reconsidered and reevaluated. Yes.
Yeah, I find it interesting that in my previous job, we always did a survey out to our people, say what kind of job we're doing. And inevitably they would come back and they would say, we hear from the people that are really disenchanted, and we hear from the people that just love it. But that bell curve in the middle, they're just running along, just living their lives, and everything's hunky-dory and they're fine with the way things are. And I think with the way things are turning, and the more that we see an example, Roe v. Wade, and now I understand that they're going after contraception and trying to get that outlawed. Something that I thought I would never hear in my lifetime. I think that middle bell curve, I keep saying, if us people don't start waking up and saying, hey, I don't like this, that, theoretically, our kids, I don't have any kids, Dan, our kids and our grandkids and my great nieces and nephews are not going to have anything close to the world that we have right now, with the rights and privileges that are experienced down the road. And it can be very, very scary, I think.
Yeah.
Looking at that. So.
Yeah. Well, when I was very deep in diversity work in my corporate life. We worked with a consultant who I just deeply love. And he said that whenever you're about to engage in diversity work, and I think this is true for any kind of a change, there are going to be 20% of the people who are like, finally, I love this, let's go. There are going to be 20% of the people who are digging their heels in and say, absolutely not, never, ever. And there's going to be 60% in the middle who never say anything. And depending on where you stand, it's going to sound like 80% are against it if you're listening to the people who are against it. Or if you're against it and you're only hearing the people saying it's for it, it's going to sound like it's 80%, but it's still a small subset. But I think I'm hopeful after the last election that people are getting more engaged in voting. I think as someone who came from a country where I had no vote, no voice in who was going to be elected or what, to help guide the future of the country. I am thrilled when I see more people voting. I don't care who they're voting for or what they're voting for. I just want to see people voting because I think we have to stand up and make our voices known. And I see people getting upset enough to make their voices known. Yeah, go ahead, Virginia.
I just wanted to just share this with everyone. I don't know if there's anyone if any of you are familiar with Innovation Ohio. It's a nonprofit. Okay. I personally think that is a very well-balanced political nonprofit entity that, Liz, you may be interested in, and anyone else who's interested in getting involved. The young lady, I listened to the political programming on WOSU Channel 2 here in Columbus, and her name is Desiree Timms. She is the president and CEO of that nonprofit. So that might be worth, visiting the website and seeing if their mission statement and their goals and objectives, if any of those resonate with anyone.
Virginia, would you mind sending that to me? I'd be happy to send that out to the entire group. Thank you. Amanda.
I have a wondering, as I'm listening to this, and we're so aware of the limitations that the two-party system has. I mean, like, what kind of choices do we? It's either this or that. Your organization, Faith in Public Life, are you seeing or working towards perhaps some new way of looking at political parties? Or is that that's not in your purview?
That's at this point, that would be a far reach for us, a relatively small organization.
Mhm.
But I hope that the work we are doing now can help prepare the way for those kinds of conversations. Like, we're very much focused on preventing political violence and increasing access to democracy. And I think as those things start to grow, as more people vote and more people feel safe voting in free and fair elections, we're going to see more independent or third-party candidates, especially down ballot candidates, and that can begin to change the conversation some.
Yeah.
I think things like automatic voter registration, redistricting, even ranked choice voting, like as some of those things get implemented, it's setting the stage for hopefully a future where there's more options for people.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just I'm as frustrated as the next person with just we're boxed in.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking broader horizons.
Yeah. and I'll plus one to the endorsement of Innovation Ohio. They're partners of ours in this work, and I know their founder, who was there before Desiree, and that some great folks and great leadership in that organization, and they provide a lot of great resources. They're kind of like the research and communications hub for the progressive ecosystem in Ohio. So they put out a lot of great resources that can help folks process what's going on.
Virginia, thanks for sending that to me. I'll get that out to everyone else. Oh, Dan, perhaps this would be a good time if people want to know more about Faith in Public Life or get in touch with you. What would be the best way for that to happen?
Yeah, so you can visit our website. I just dropped that in the chat. Feel free to email me. I dropped that in the chat as well. We're continuing to grow and evolve as an organization, and happy to share about that with anyone. And we host in Columbus a monthly breakfast called the Interfaith Justice Table. The next one of those is November 30th, 9 to 11 a.m. At First Congregational Church on East Broad. If anybody is interested in that, if anybody's interested in that, email me and I'll make sure you have the right information, or you can get in touch with me through Alejandro, of course. Because the purpose of that group is to bring people together in community so that we can, assemble our voices and bring our differences together to work together. So I invite you all to check that out.
I highly recommend the Interfaith Justice Table. It is so incredibly informative and very uplifting to see so many people working so hard for equity and justice and other things.
Thanks.
Any last questions for Dan? Dan, any closing thoughts that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I'm just I'm feeling grateful for this time and for the people in this room. So thank you for inviting me into this conversation. And after working real hard for a long time, I was really grateful Tuesday night also that people are using their voice and their voices are being heard. And so I just want to lift that up. Being a musician and a music lover, I think about amplifiers. Those folks' voices, let's get them some microphones, let's plug them into amplifiers, let's let the people get louder, so that the people know what they need, and they can speak up and say what they need, and we can all work together to be sure that everybody, all God's children, have what they need to flourish. So I appreciate the work that you all do and being a part of that as well.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's so great having you here. If you did not get a chance, Dan and I did an Awakening Lives podcast in October. We talked about some of these things, but completely different conversation there. So I encourage you to take a listen to that. And we just released a new episode of Awakening Lives. I had a wonderful conversation with Annie Dalby on grief and loss. And she's just a delightful person, and I learned so much listening to her. So I encourage you to do that. And last thing I'll share in terms of programming and events, we're holding an open house on December 11th at our offices. You can come out to our website, spiritualitynetwork.org, and sign up for that. We would love to spend some social time with you and talking about our dreams for the future. And very last thing I'll share is I'll follow up this conversation with a survey, ask you to share your perspectives on the conversation and the time we had together, so that we can improve these as we move forward. And look forward to seeing you at a future Spirituality Network event. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.